Take that.
Yes, the hidden, yes. Well, this year, you know, when we were doing the census, we found that we were not only finding lots of things about Canal Walk and, you know, where Bennett's were, Bearwater, etc., but we were all over hidden country, and we've known a lot of the people who farmed on hidden country, but it was particularly nice this year for us to walk that land and see every house that was on it, simply because 2 years ago we went to stay with a very old school friend of mine who's married to an American, and they live in Washington, not Washington DC, Washington State, and my husband was offered an evening at Rotarians, so he went with her vicar to Rotarians and was introduced to a gentleman called Mr. Hidden, a very dear gentleman he was. He was well into his 80s, and my husband found him most interesting to talk to, but unfortunately the gentleman of the church had a service to take, so his talk with him was cut short. Anyway, that evening there was a phone call at the house, and this elderly gentleman rang up and said, would we like to go to Hidden House in Vancouver, which is again part of Washington State, and have a meal with him. Now, I didn't know it didn't mean anything to me, but my friend who I was staying with said, I've never eaten there, it's the most expensive place in Washington. It is called Hidden House. Oh yes, so this gentleman rang, as I say, invited us to this hidden house for a meal. So duly we went there, and we discovered that his family originated from the Hiddens in around the 1600s and went out to America, presumably with the Pilgrim Fathers, and there have been connections with Hungerford. I believe that one of the past presidents, or past, what do you call them in Hungerford, mayors, or what's the other one, constables?
Yeah, constables.
Yes, has a connection. Would know some of the cousins who still live in Surrey, I believe. But, oh, he was such an interesting gentleman. He just casually said to my husband and myself, do you happen to know Berkshire? You see, because he just knew we were English to start with. And we said, yes, you know, we knew Berkshire. And I said, you know, we've lived and worked in it most of our life. And in fact, I said, I was born in a place called Hungerford. And of course, as soon as we said Hungerford, the whole story came out of how he was connected to Hungerford. And he said he'd got memories of Hungerford, that he'd obviously been travelling backwards and forwards to England and trying to find his ancestors, etc. in this country. And he obviously used to travel in the days when it was probably very expensive to come across on a boat. And he'd been one of the first and early travellers to come across. And he said, and do you know, he said, I can tell you something about Hungerford, he said. I had my hair cut in Hungerford. You see? And I said, do tell me where you had it cut, Mr. Hinton. And he said it was at a little hairdresser's near the Bear Hotel. And I said, that's my grandfather, you see. No, wasn't that very, very strange? And then he said, and he turned to my friend, and he said, no, I believe you came from England too. Does that mean you know Hungerford? And she said, well, I came from Stockcross. So he was obviously interested in hearing all about her, because she came from a farming family too. And then we went on talking about Mr. and Mrs. King, because Norman and Nadine King, and Nadine King lives in, you know Nadine, that's right, she lives in Canal Walk. Nadine was in my former school, and we've known them both. And of course, they lived at one of the hidden farms, and he had visited them when he was over here, and I believe Elizabeth, who was married to a friend of our son, had visited him in America. And we thought, well, you know, what a very small world it is. You know, you meet somewhere wherever you go in the world, somewhere who's connected. Now, this very weekend, what's the date today? It must have been this weekend, just gone by. This very gentleman has been made, not a freeman of the borough, I don't know what they call it, but it's something of Clark County. It's for his services. He has a brick building business, and a lot of his handmade bricks have built the town of Vancouver, which is the American Vancouver, because of course there's Vancouver, Washington State, and Vancouver, Canada. And this weekend he was paid this very special award, and the person that my girlfriend's husband works for, his employer was also made, and they went to the same dinner. So Pat wrote to me and said, I know you probably are still connected with Mr. Hidden, but she said it would be nice if perhaps you could send him something from Hungerford. So I went round Hungerford and I collected up some all the cards I could with views of Hungerford on, and thanks and photographs. Yes, I got all 4 of them because I kept finding the same ones, and sent them to him for this weekend. And told him about my census work. And I said every inch I trod must have been your homeland. So I'm sure, you know, it would have, well, I hope it would have pleased him, because he's now into his 90s, and he has got cancer. So his life is, you know, probably short.
Because Betty McCabbin has got a wonderful book. I think it's written by Norman, who now lives in Frinton.
Oh, no, that's the cousin he referred to then. It was Frinton, that's right.
It's a history going back, you know, to year dot. And he maintains that the name Eddington and Hidden are one and the same, but over the centuries
yes. No, that's where he got us a bit confused in asking, because you see Derek kept saying, oh, now you must join on to the Eddington estate, and that's what he said. No, he said those names are all one, and we couldn't quite understand it because we'd always known them as you know, as different names. But it was a coincidence, wasn't it? Small world. So, you know, whether we'll hear from him, but I may not hear from him, because obviously he's got very elderly and they were just hoping he was going to be well enough to go. But our friends aren't quite certain, and she will be over again because her elderly mother lives in Stockcross, so she comes over each year. Her husband won't come this year, but she's coming for 3 weeks in September. We always get to go and do all the walks, you know.
Oh, lovely.
Forge, and he would put those out into the river, and the children would scramble in the river for them. Not only did they scramble for oranges in the street, they would scramble for sizzling pennies that went into the river, which was, you know, part of tradition, yes. And also, we always, at carnival time, always put the lights all across the river. You know, they always had crisscrossed across the river wire with these little tiny lantern lights that you put these night lights in.
Yes.
They were little, like blue, green, yellow bottles. We stored them in our loft, hundreds of them. My dad always put those out. And of course it was lovely because I could always watch everything from our windows. Carnival always went past.
It was quite a big occasion
oh, yes.
when you were younger.
Yes, it was. It was a big occasion. I mean, I'd never been to anything in the Hungerford Carnival now. I mean, I'm not particularly carnival-minded, but I think there's an age group.
But it was probably a great day.
That's right, it was in Hungerford when I was younger. And I think when our children were tiny, we took them to Newbury, to the carnival there. When they didn't want to go, we didn't bother anymore. And, you know, it's one of those things that you change your views on.
It's almost carnival time now, isn't it?
Yes, I've just had a thing come through the door. And I see there's lots of things on, and obviously.
But you see, in those days, there weren't the other attractions.
No, of course.
It was the